Dark camera. All right, there you go. Looking good. All right. We are live. We are talking about family offshore trusts. We're talking about passport portfolios, offshore corporate structures, all of that fun stuff. Can be overwhelming when you first start. You should always have a professional working with you. Typically, you'll have multiple. Typically, you'll have a professional that is helping you through everything. You'll have a professional in the jurisdiction, and you'll have a professional at home when you start doing this stuff. What is going on? One of my lives just magically ended. I don't know what that was about. Yes, resume the live. All right. Okay, that was weird. TikTok, your live just like magically ended on my side. Looks like it was suspended on your side. All right. So, passport portfolios, offshore family trusts, offshore corporate structures. All right. So those are the things that we are talking about today. Now, it's important to have your professional team kind of locked in, okay? You'll run into situations where unprofessional teams will be introduced to you, okay? They're not always scammers. Most of the time, they're actually opportunists, right? People use that scammer thing a lot. They're not always scammers. Most of the time, they're opportunists. And there's an issue really worldwide. I used to run into this in China as well. It's not a Kenyan issue, right? But there's an issue with folks that are presented with an opportunity and then they're not honest about their capabilities, right? And so what'll end up happening is you'll engage somebody and ask if they can do something and they'll just say yes. Right? Yeah, I can do it. Right? Even professionals who are not the type of professional you need specifically, right? So accountants that know nothing about cross-border tax payments, lawyers who are not the type of lawyer that you need. So people who have a bit of clout in their professional background, but are not the professional that you need in the moment, those folks will sometimes also say, yes, they can do something, and actually end up trying to figure it out after the fact, right? Sometimes that works if they have a good network, but it never works as well as a person who's experienced in actually doing it, right? So just keep that in mind as you guys are moving forward through these processes. That's why we ended our agent program. We used to have an agent program where like an agent could bring their client to us and then we would essentially be the agent's vendor and we would start, providing services via that agent. We ended that program because some of the agents will, maybe meet somebody locally. They got great vibes together. Then all of a sudden, they're bringing, that quote unquote service provider to you, and they actually don't know what they're doing, right? And so we've run into a couple of times. Of course, that person will give a ridiculous quote, and it'll seem like they're the cheapest person, most cost effective, blah 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 blah. And then you get what you pay for. And then what ends up happening is those people then circle back to us, right? Because we were involved in the initial setup or whatever, and their agent typically disappears, right? So we got rid of that. We don't do the agent things anymore. We still have our referral program. We still pay quite handsomely for referrals, but we do not allow agents to manage clients anymore. So, hey, how are you? How are you? Hey, King, how's it going? So, what are we talking about today? We are talking about passport portfolios. We are talking about offshore family trusts, and we are talking about offshore corporate structures. All right. And currently just getting into making sure that all your service providers are professionals. All right. Make sure that you got that going on. All right. No. There's three different live streams, and the live stream that question was asked on doesn't have a title like the other two. So the other two, you can just read the title and know what we're talking about. That live stream doesn't have that functionality. All right. Be nice. All right. So What do we use family trust for? What we don't use a family trust for is asset protection. We don't use a family trust for asset protection. All right. You can have multiple trusts. They can be set up for multiple different things. One thing that a family trust is not going to be set up for is asset protection. Okay. Can you try to double dip? Yes. Every time you add another function to a trust, you add another opening, right, from someone to attack that trust, right? So you want to make sure that your family trust is for generational wealth purposes, inheritance purposes, so on and so forth, right? So that's what your family trust is. If you keep it to one trust per legal tactic, essentially, then you can have a really hardcore lockdown trust. You keep adding more and more tactics and strategies. There are going to be different real world laws that govern those strategies, and there's going to be different exemptions to those laws, and different ways to penetrate protections in that legal stratosphere, right? So the more things you add, to that trust, the more external laws now scrutinize the build of that trust to see if the trust is operating, legally or within legal bounds, so on and so forth. And then the more openings you create, right? So what we do at our law firm is there's a red team, right? The red team's job is, while the trust is being designed, their job is to figure out how to bust it, right? So they sit there and they crack open all the law books, and they're trying to figure out a way to steal in the trust, right? To break that trust open, make it vulnerable to creditors, and they do that the entire time the trust is being built. So that's part of the process with us, and that's the type of process that you'll get from a professional, right? So there'll be a red team and there'll be a blue team. And the blue team will be building everything and adding everything you asked for, and the red team will be looking up legal precedents to penetrate that, and jam that trust up. And then we take the red team report and we plug all the holes, and all the holes they found and all the ways they found to penetrate that trust. We plug it before the final trust has been submitted and registered. So that's what you want, professionalism, right? So that's what you want there. What'll end up happening with your international corporations is, just want to make sure that you're tax compliant. You want to make sure that if you're hiring local folks, those folks are tax compliant. You can always find a local person to give you a quote that's ridiculously low. It's ridiculously low for a reason. And then what ends up happening is you end up paying for it down the road. You also want to make sure that any, local individuals that are working for you are on the level. I'll give you guys a really, really, really common example. We do a lot of properties, right? And so what'll end up happening, and this is kind of why we ended our agent program. We don't do agents anymore, right? Just referrals. But what'll end up happening is, if we have an agent in the middle, the agent might go find somebody that costs less or whatever, for whatever reason, right? Maybe to increase their commission, like whatever the reason might be. But they might go find somebody that they don't actually know very well, and they can't really do due diligence on them, because typically the agents are not here. Like, we had one agent lived in Mexico, another agent lived in Florida. There was an agent that actually lived in Ireland, so they're not here, right? And so what'll end up happening is, like, the property manager, there are like power outages that happen, right? So the power outage will become a very big excuse that they'll hear all the time, even when there's not actually a power outage, right? And the reason why they start hearing that excuse over and over again is because they're turning off the cameras, so they can put their own people, like, in your Airbnb, or utilize your business in a separate way and pocket the money and never tell you, right? And then what ends up happening is, like, they're setting up your CCTV system. So they know the back door to the CCTV system. They're the ones who know where all the cameras are pointed, and maybe they start taking advantage, especially because it's hard to hold them accountable internationally. That's why you make sure that your main company is actually represented in the U.S., so you can hold them accountable, or whatever country you come from, but so that you can hold them accountable in your country, right? We actually did a deal with a Brit on a Brit relocation, and they were like, "Look, you got to open a branch in the UK." And so we had to do that, which was surprisingly easy, by the way. But we had to open, a branch in the UK because they wanted that. They wanted to be able to say, okay, I need to be able to hold you responsible locally, right? Which was fine. That made perfect sense to us. Same thing with Canada. Like, so, we had Canadian clients that were like, you got to open what they call a number corporation, right? So it's a corporation with just a number. There's no name on the corporation. But again, it still gives puts you in the local jurisdiction, right? And so you want to be careful about that, because you will get what you pay for. And sometimes, and this happens, again, these are not Kenyan issues. These are international issues that I've run across multiple times, especially like when I was living in China and all of that stuff, in the Philippines and all of that. Sometimes what you'll find is that there are kind of two different sets of rules. There's really only one set of rules, but the locals have ways around the rules because they're local, right? And the authorities will not allow a foreigner to utilize the same methods to circumvent whatever rules are in place, right? So you'll run into that, all over the place. Same thing in China. There were things that I couldn't get away with as a local that Chinese people could get away with, just based on the fact that they were technically a local, right? And so, for example, if we create a facility, like I'll give you an actually really, really good example, right? That is a guardhouse. That guardhouse has a kitchen. It has the guard office, which is where that window is. There's a bathroom, and a break area. But also inside, there's like an emergency eye flush in case, something gets thrown in the security guard's eyes. There's all the OSHA stuff. There's no OSHA here, but like all the OSHA stuff you could think about is in there. And you can see how big that is, right? It's like a one-bedroom apartment, essentially. That, the price that we paid to make that is more than a local person would have done, because a local person would have put up a shack. And they were like, oh, it's just a shack. Just put the security guard in the shack, right? And so it would have been less than half the price. But if something happens to the guard and the local version of the EPA shows up to investigate, a local person can get away with the shack, not a foreigner. There's going to be all kinds of fines, all kinds of, levies against me for not having all of the OSHA style stuff, all of the protective stuff, right, provided for that employee that a foreigner wouldn't have to deal with. All right. So you got to be careful with that you may go ahead and say, oh, well, it's so much cheaper, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to go deal with this foreign. And the local don't know no different, because their life experience has not been that of a foreigner operating in their country. So they're going to tell you, oh, yeah, we can. Yeah. The problem is it's on record that you would have an investor permit, right? So no matter what local is representing, it's on record that there's a foreigner that owns this. And so local things tend to stop working, when they realize like there's a foreigner that owns this. And typically what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that people aren't abusing, the local labor force, that there's no sweatshops, that there's no working conditions, blah, 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 blah. But they definitely enforce that more stringently. And again, this is virtually every country I've gone to outside of the West. They definitely enforce that more stringently on foreigners than they do locals. Okay? So just keep that in mind. It's better to spend a little bit more and be above board and have everything, taken care of and covered for you, versus, trying to operate as a local, right, in a physical sense. Where we do want to operate as a local is in a monetary sense, which brings us to the other part of our discussion today, which is passport portfolios. You want to be able to build, as part of your generational wealth plan, a passport portfolio strategy, right? If you only have one passport, you're limited to accessing only that financial market, only those jurisdictions, only those conventions and treaties, right? What conventions and treaties might I be talking about? There is a Paris Convention on copywriting or on intellectual property, period, right? There are DTAs and DTAAs, right? What do they do? They keep you from paying taxes, right? Those are dual tax avoidance agreements. and they're signed between countries. And the countries that sign those agreements are basically saying, hey, listen, if one of your people pay us tax, then you won't tax them. If one of our people pay you tax, then, you don't tax them, and that's essentially obviously a very high level overview of a very legal and governmental agreement. But that's essentially what those agreements do. So it creates a situation where you're not double taxed, where you can find yourself in a double tax situation, especially if you have bad tax people, right? You can find yourself in a situation where you're a tax resident of multiple places. And so typically you can only be a tax resident of two places. However, there are ways to become a tax resident of 3 or 4 places, right? Because there's tax residency that's based on citizenship. Only 3 countries in the world do that, the United States being one of them. There's tax residency based on time, right? So the United States actually does that as well, but for foreigners, right? So if you spend enough time in a country, it's typically 181 days, but it can be 120, right? Depending on the country. You can gain tax residency in that country, even if you have no other statuses at all, right? So you might not have an immigration status. And this is where the border hoppers mess themselves up, because you'll always hear these people that are like, oh yeah, I stay in the country for 90 days on a tourist visa, then I cross the border, then I come back, get another 90 days, right? Those are border hoppers. It's illegal. They're illegally living, they're illegally immigrating into another country. Some countries just don't enforce it as much, but you never know when they will. So it's kind of nerve wracking from my position, right? But what'll end up happening is those people become tax residents and have no immigration status, right? So they're not covered under any treaties. So even if there is a dual tax avoidance agreement, they're not covered, right? Because they're illegally immigrating. So now they may have a dual tax treatment, especially if they're Americans, because they got an American tax obligation no matter where they live, right? And now they have become a tax resident of this new place that they're border hopping in, right? Then the third way is called cumulative. You can get a cumulative tax residency, right? So let's say the number is 181 days, and you never stay that long, right? You always stay 179, right? You're staying 6 months in one place, and what they're looking for is 6 months in a day or something like that, right? So let's say you just never ever stay that long, but you keep coming back every year. There are a lot of countries that have a cumulative tax residency, right? So for example, here in Kenya, it's 3 years. 3 years, and I want to say it's not 181 for the cumulative one. I think it's 120, right? So 3 years of 120 days or more, and you're a tax resident here, right? So that means that you could technically be spending 6 months, I don't know, let's say 6 months in America, right? So you're a tax resident in America. 6 months, in the UK. But the next 2 years, you spend 120 days in Kenya, right? And so you spend some time here, you spend some time there. It's possible that you could be a tax resident of Kenya, the UK, and the United States because of the cumulative tax residency qualification, right? Especially in that 4th year, depending on what you do, right? So understanding the tax sides of things is super important, and it's also super confusing. And so you should always have a tax professional handle that, and that professional needs to be a professional in the disciplines that you need, right? There are tax people that are only professional at tax returns in the United States. There are tax people who are only professional at cross-border deals, right? Just because they're a CPA does not mean they can do it all. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you can do brain surgery, right? There are specialists. So you need to find your international tax specialist. That's important. So make sure you find your international tax specialist and have them on your team. Okay. Then you can decide, all right, which one of these jurisdictions do I want to engage in? Which one of these jurisdictions do I want their dual tax avoidance agreements? Which one of these jurisdictions do I want market access to? So on and so forth, right? That's going to create your passport portfolio plan, right? And that plan is going to be for you and your generational, wealth, right? So your next generation. So currently, for example, my oh, he just turned 19. My 19-month-old son has one more passport than I do, right? So I have multiple passports, and because of my passport portfolio plan, my son was born with a passport I don't yet have. I will have it soon, but I don't yet have it. So my son actually has more passports than I do because we planned it, right? So, and he just, as an example of that, right? So why? What do you need the extra passports for? Hey, Chris, how are you? What do you need the extra? Oh, is it that, Chris? Hey, how's it going, man? What do you need that for, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. We just went to China, right? So if you're following our social media, you see that we went to China. We did a bunch of deals to make the buildings that we build for our clients when they relocate here more modern. We have all these different options and all that stuff. All right, great business trip. We did a lot of great work there, right? We took the household. Well, we took the senior household, the staff, right? And so some of the household staff are local Kenyans, of course, and my wife is a Kenyan. Okay, it took, what was it, 2 months to get my wife a visa to go to China. And it was like back and forth, right? So like when you apply for this visa, they send something back. You spelled this wrong. You put this in the wrong place. We don't want you to write this. We want you to write that, right? Even if what you wrote was the truth, like certain things that they want it in a certain way. So for example, because it's China, they have like province, city, and something else on their address, right? So it'll say, where was your passport issued? And it'll ask for like the province, the city, and the country. Well, on an American passport and a Kenyan passport, there's only two of those. It's just Kenya, and then here it's either the state, and then in the U.S. it's typically United States of America, and then like Washington D.C. Right? There's no city, right? So if you put the city you were in when you applied, which is the correct answer, the honest answer to the question, they kick it back to you, right? So they kick back your application. They're like, no, put the state where it says city, right? Because they want all the answers to be visible on your passport, and that city is not visible on your passport, right? So it's dumb little stuff like that. Okay, so everything keeps getting kicked back over 2 months of everything getting kicked back. Then there's a requirement that if it's their first time in China, which it was for my wife, and our governess came with as well, the baby came, all of that, right? So all those people, it was the first time. So they had a requirement that if it was your first time, you need a local in-country mainland China tourist agency that is essentially inviting you and taking responsibility for you while you're there, right? Which is crazy, right? So then I had to, call Chinese contacts and get that going, right? Okay, fine. All of that said and done, set all of that up for all staff, everybody who it's their first time there and they're Kenyan. They got a single entry, 30-day visa. Okay. My son, who was 17 months old at the time, but had a Kenyan passport and a US passport, as soon as we submitted his US passport, he got 10 years, 60 days multi-entry. If you know anything about America, you know that juvenile passports don't even last 10 years, right? Juvenile passports last a shorter amount of time than adult passports. Here in Kenya, it's the same amount of time. But in America, juvenile passports, they don't last as long because the child changes facially so much, right? So he has a longer Chinese visa than he has a passport. All because he's part of a passport portfolio, right? He has multiple passports and he can operate from multiple jurisdictions and always choose the most favorable jurisdiction to him. So his mom was only allowed in China for 30 days. Now her visa is not valid anymore. So we have to apply for another one for her the next time we go. He has 10 years, multi-entry, and he can go for 60 days, not 30, right? He's a 19-month-old baby, right? So this is the difference of when you plan out the family's future, and the passport portfolio is part of that plan, right? People can access different financial markets. They can access different actual markets. That was a physical market. That wasn't, trying to get on the Chinese stock market or trying to buy a Chinese bond or something as a citizen or something like that. That's a physical market. We went there and did physical business and signed physical contracts, and we entered that market, right? But he, as a 19-month-old baby, already has greater access to that market than his mother does because of the passport portfolio plan that I had set in place even before I met his mother, right? So he has two additional passports that his mother doesn't have, right? So that's the purpose of the passport portfolio. Okay. We saw a lot of use during COVID. Can't stop people from going home, even during lockdown, right? So if I wanted to go somewhere that I happen to have a passport to, just go up there and whip out the passport. Nothing they could do about it. So even when no one else could travel, no one else could go anywhere else, I could go to the places where I had a passport, right? So, and when I got there, I wasn't held in quarantine because I'm a citizen. Citizens aren't forced to go to hotels and be held in quarantine. A lot of that, if you were traveling during COVID, you remember there was a lot of money flowing because you would show up in a place where you didn't have a passport and they were like, you got to go to this designated hotel, or else you go to like a really crappy hospital that you don't want to be sitting in. So you go pay, $200 a night, $500 a night to be in this dedicated hotel, and you quarantine for the next 2 weeks. And then at the end of that, we give you a COVID test. And if you're negative, then you can go. So that means that, if you even traveled there and what you traveled there was less than 2 weeks long, then your entire stay was in quarantine, right? And you had to pay for it, right? So, but if you had a passport portfolio, you would show up, welcome home because you have a passport, and that's it. You're gone, right? So these are the kind of surface level grants you. The deeper bonuses are treaty bonuses. So if you have a passport portfolio and you have a passport from a country that has a treaty with your country, especially a tax treaty, but sometimes it's not even a tax treaty. Sometimes it's an immigration treaty. Sometimes it's a business treaty, right? Like there's what's called the E1 treaty, the E1 treaty visa, right? So there's the E1 treaty trader, it's called, right? You guys can Google it. But certain countries, their businesses can trade in, say, like the United States, even if you're not a United States citizen, because there's a trader treaty on the books with some of those countries. So depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve, you would create your passport portfolio around that. And then you would have your immigration experts qualifying you for each, passport. Some of them you can do remotely. Some of them you can't. Some of them you have to be in country. Some of them you only have to be in country for like a couple of days, right? Trying to think of Burkina Faso, for example, is a good example of that. For Burkina Faso, you can get a passport. You can't vote. So I always consider it quasi citizenship, but that doesn't typically matter to most people. So you can get a passport for Burkina Faso, and then you get this kind of like provisional passport, or not even provisional passport. You get like a provisional citizenship status. And then over the next 3 years, you end up going to Burkina Faso, and I think it's for like a week. Like you got to go for like 1 week every year for the next 3 years, and at the end of that, you get the actual passport, but you never get voting rights, right? So, and depending on what your focus is, which might be a business focus, or it might be a Sahel state focus, like maybe you want to do something with them or whatever. That might not matter, right? So while you're getting that passport, you could obviously be getting, at least another one, if not two more, right? The typical ways to get a passport are by descendancy. A lot of people don't even know there's a passport that they already qualify for. That's typically the easiest and the first passport that everybody gets is their descendancy passport, whether they even knew they qualified for it or not, right? So we had clients that like qualified for an Irish passport and didn't even realize it, right? And barely, don't look Irish, but their grandmother was, and so they had qualified through that. So that was like their first passport, right? Which is, pretty decent because it gave them EU access right away, right? So Then the next most common way to get it is by an investment, right? So there are plenty of places that have a setup where, like, if you invest X amount of dollars, that could lead to a passport. More commonly, investments lead to permanent residency, but there are some places where investments do lead to a passport. It's called Citizenship by Investment, CBI, right? So there are CBI programs that will lead you to a passport via investment. So that's the next most common way. The third most common way is, which is kind of like an investment path, but it's something similar. It's a housing path. And there are typically two types of housing paths. So Cayman Islands, for example, if you buy a house and that house is more expensive than, I think it's $300,000, right? So if it's more expensive than $300,000, that house could qualify you for Grand Cayman residency and or citizenship, right? If you look at Hong Kong, though, the price of the house used to not matter. They may have updated, but the price of the house used to not matter, but you had to live there for 7 years straight, but also own the house. Like, you couldn't just live there, and you have an apartment. Like, you had to own a house for 7 years. And then that would get you the Hong Kong SAR passport, which was pretty impressive, because even though Hong Kong is now part of China, for the better part of the last 100 years, it was part of the UK, and they were an SAR. SARs are special places that might be cities. They typically are cities or islands. And those cities or islands get to act like countries, right? So that SAR typically has its version of, like, some kind of president. They're often called the chief executive, not the president. Sometimes they're just called the governor. But they're allowed to make their own laws that don't necessarily coincide with the laws of the country that they're part of. So Macau is an SAR. Hong Kong is an SAR. Let me think. Zanzibar is an SAR. When you go to the Vatican's a city state. That's a little bit different. The Vatican is a city that is also a country. So that's a little bit of a different thing, but it's similar to an SAR in the sense that the Vatican doesn't have a military. The Italian military protects the Vatican, even though it's its own country, right? So there's that. Monaco has its own passport. And typically when you see a place inside another place that has its own passport, it's an SAR, right? So those SARs sometimes have greater access to things. Like, Monaco's passport was one of the greatest passports in the world to have as far as travel is concerned. Japan, another really, really good one. Hong Kong was a really, really good one for a long time as well. And so now Hong Kong can also give you access to China because China has gotten Hong Kong back, right? So they're all strategic plans that you put in place based on what you need, right? So there's no one passport portfolio for them all. It has to fit whatever it is you're planning to do with your family eventually. All right. So that's going to largely depend on the goals of your family, which is typically written down in your family constitution, which we talked about last live. So whatever your family constitution says, that's now where you're going to build from there into your passport portfolio, right? So it's going to be part of your generational wealth plan. And eventually, the family will have access to everywhere. There are certain places that have really, really good incentives for really well-off families, but do not allow for multiple citizenships. So do not allow dual citizenship. So those are places like Singapore. Singapore has really, really good investment benefits for well-off families. We have, like, clients that have their family office is in Singapore because there are great incentives to put your family office in Singapore. And by putting your family office in Singapore, it can earn you Singaporean citizenship. Once you have Singaporean citizenship, you can't have any other citizenship. It's a lot like Tanzania, except Tanzania doesn't give you anything, right? So you at least get benefits for giving up all your other citizenships, right? So what'll end up happening is at some point, in the future when the family is like really set up and there's money flowing and you're doing it, right? Somebody will eventually become the Singaporean branch of the family. So some descendant will essentially give up the passport portfolio and be the Singaporean that's running the family office, right? And so you'll have your family office there, and all your investments will be based out of there, and you'll get those tax benefits, and your family as a whole will benefit from it. But somebody got to fall on the sword, right? So those things happen within passport portfolios too, where one specific member of the family will end up having to give up the passports in order to get really, really solid bonuses, right? You don't want to do it for a place like Tanzania where you're not getting anything, right? You want to do it for a place like Singapore where they're essentially really paying you to do it. All right, so that was a lot. Any questions on that? Any questions on the passport portfolio journey? What else did we talk about? Professionals, right? Making sure you have the right professionals. Cheap is expensive. You know, get the right stuff. Pay for quality. Get the quality mindset going. Seriously. If you have a price mindset where price is the only thing that matters to you, do not go abroad. You're going to mess yourself up. You're going to throw your money away. Cheap is expensive, especially when you can't hold people accountable, which you never can initially unless you're working with a firm that has a branch in your home country. So no matter where you go, you typically cannot hold people accountable who are local initially until you get rooted, and then then you can do that. So make sure that you're focused on quality. Make sure that's your focus. And if that can't be your focus, that's cool. Just accept that and don't go international. It's all good. Not everybody has to. Hey, Carrie, how's it going? Zacarias. Oh, from Greece. Is it Carrie from Greece? How's it going? Welcome to the live. How's your estate down here? We haven't heard from you in a long time. How's everything? That's good to hear. Outstanding. Yeah, you know firsthand about the local property managers ripping you off, don't you? Everything's good out there, though. Excellent, 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 excellent. You were actually our first trust estate in Malindi. You hold that distinction. Are you here in Kenya or are you back in Greece right now? You're here. Yeah, yeah. Stop down and see me. Oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was an unexpected passing. I appreciate those condolences. Thank you for that. Yeah, I actually got the call on a live. I was on this live. I got a call, answered the phone, and they were like, "Your dad's dead." So that ended the live. But yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so there are no questions on that. Are you originally American? Yes, I'm originally from America, Philadelphia area. Yeah, yeah, no, no. Give me a call. My number's not changed. Give me a call. Hey, hey, Tiffany, what's going on? Hi, Burkina Faso. What did you say about the passport? Maybe so. Oh, yes, yes, yes. So, Burkina Faso has I think it's actually a diaspora passport situation, right? Where they're inviting members of the diaspora back. Oh, are you from Philly, Kirsten? I'm from Reading. If you're from Philly, I always say the Philadelphia area because nobody knows where Reading is. So, but I lived in Philly the last 5 years of being in America. So Burkina Faso set up a thing where you could come there, you could apply for citizenship. There is an organization called ADDI. It's like the African Diaspora Developmental Institute. They're based in America, so they can be held accountable. You can go with them. They have trips over there all the time. And then what it is you can go over there, you can apply for the passport, or the citizenship, I should say, and you'll get like a provisional grant of citizenship. They have some requirements, like you can't have another African citizenship. But you can obviously you have other citizenship. You're not a stateless person, right? So you can show it up with a passport in some way. And then I think you have to go there for a week, a year, for 3 years, and the first time you go and apply like counts. So at the end of the 3 years, you get a passport. I'm almost positive you don't get like the full rights to vote, but that's still a better deal than Ghana. Like Ghana, what they're calling like the right of a vote is not citizenship. It's essentially permanent residency, and a lot of people get that screwed up. So yeah, that definitely exists. I can get you more information on that if you want. Jesus, if you want. I have a lot of family in Reading and Lancaster. Yeah. Lancaster, man, it's been a long time since I've been to Lancaster. Shady Maples. For those of you who don't know, Shady Maples is like the largest buffet in the world, I guess, and it's in Lancaster County. For sure. Yeah. I guess I'll see you in Journey Back to Eden. I think you're coming to that, right? And there'll be the Journey Back to Eden will happen in December. You guys go check out Traverse Culture for that. Traverse Culture is amazing. In Kenya, amongst the diaspora especially, Traverse Culture is the only other company that legitimately does relocations. All other foreigners claiming that they do, I would take a second look at them or hire a lawyer to take a look into what they're about. But Traverse Culture and Diaspora Freedom Initiative are the only two foreign firms that are doing full relocations in Kenya. Hey, it's Chris. Hey, Chris, how are you? Chris who? You said, hey, it's Chris, like I should know you. I have a cousin named Chris. Where are you from, Chris? Okay, all right. So what have we not spoken about? I opened up for those questions. All right, I think we answered all the questions that came in. All right, so offshore structuring, right? So what do we use offshore structuring for? We might use offshore structuring for tax benefits, okay? And we might use a trust to do that. Now, a trust is a tax neutral vehicle, no matter what the idiots on TikTok tell you, right? A trust is a tax neutral vehicle. In many circumstances, the trust tax rate is higher than the corporate tax rate or the individual tax rate, or you get to the highest tax bracket quicker in a trust, right? So why would we be using an offshore trust to assist with taxes? It's not the trust, okay? The trust is not the key. The jurisdiction is the key, right? So the jurisdiction is the key that's going to create the situation where the taxes are benefited. So, you know what, Tiffany? Maybe I'll use you as an example, right? So Tiffany just built an awesome Airbnb here in Kenya, and she's going to have people come stay here with her, right? Now, what she could have done, right? I'm not announcing any of her business beyond that, so you don't know whether she's done it or not. But what she could have done is she could have set up a Seychelles trust, right? And that Seychelles trust could have owned a booking company. And the booking company could be booking for her Airbnb. Now, why would you do that? Because the Seychelles has a corporate tax rate of 0% for all IBC companies, right? What's an IBC company? An IBC company is an international business company. It's a company that, under the local laws of that country, cannot do business in that country. It is an international business company, and some people say international business corporation, right? Cannot do business in that country. As long as it doesn't do business in that country, its tax rate is typically reduced or incentivized. For the Seychelles, it's 0. For Mauritius, it's like 1.5%, right? So now you have a booking agency that has a 0% tax rate, right? So what if that booking agency was the booking agency that booked all of Tiffany's clients? Right? So all international bookings, what would the tax rate on that be? Where would the profits be going? Right? Would they be going in the place with the 38% corporate tax rate? Or would they be going in the place with the 0% corporate tax rate? What do you think that would do for the business? Now, does it make sense to do that with your first Airbnb and you don't know how much money is coming in and you don't know how your team is going to perform and you don't know? Maybe not. But once you do know, does that start making sense? Probably, right? So like we have a beachfront boutique hospital, boutique hotel. It makes sense for them, right? Now, it wouldn't work from a legal perspective with a local booking, but all their international bookings go through their international booking company, which happens to be in the Seychelles, which has a 0% corporate tax rate. So they're not paying any taxes on their international bookings as far as profits are concerned. Now, when those people come in country, they still have to pay VAT. They still have to pay all their local taxes. They order food and room service. All those taxes have to be paid. But if they did not book inside that tax jurisdiction, then that particular booking might not be taxable if you have the right structure. So does the trust reduce tax? No. Trusts are tax neutral vehicles, period. Trust is, if a trust is part of your taxation strategy and it's the trust itself that's part of your taxation strategy, something is wrong. Go get a second opinion. All right? It's the jurisdiction. So because it's an offshore trust and you have an offshore company, the jurisdiction is saving you taxes, not the trust. The trust is a tax neutral entity. It does not save you in taxes. People who tell you that are lying. Right? Trust will not save you in taxes. It's the jurisdiction that's going to save you. Now, functions of the trust might save you in taxes, right? So we're talking about family trusts as well. One of the functions of a Kenyan family trust is each beneficiary can have a distribution of 10 million per year, tax free. Aha, there's a tax savings, right? But the trust itself as an entity is not going to, you can't just throw all your stuff in the trust and, oh, great, now my taxes are different. No, probably your taxes will be higher, right? Trusts are typically taxed at the highest level much faster than individuals and corporations, especially in the United States, right? There's only like 4 trust brackets in the United States, and you get to the highest bracket at like $30,000 or something like that, right? So you don't want to use a trust as a tax strategy unless it's a jurisdictional strategy, right? So you're going to a jurisdiction with that trust that has lower taxes. And then you have to have an entire structural strategy with your companies, because your trust is going to own companies, and there's probably going to be at least 2. There's probably going to be an operating company that's doing the work, that has local VAT or sales tax or consumption tax or whatever it's called in the country you live in, that it has to deal with. And then there's probably going to be a holding company. And the holding company is going to be owned more than likely by the trust. And they'll be in jurisdictions that are tax friendly, right? And then a lot of those jurisdictions, you'll want to have something set up in there, where there are like royalty agreements going on. But all of those things have to be reasonable, right? Again, be careful of any of the sensational information that you get, or things that are too cheap to be, it's like too cheap to be true. It probably is. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? So it's one of those things where, like, I've seen people on this app talking about, like, oh yeah, you can have the holding company own your trademark and then pay all of your taxes and a royal, or not your taxes, all of your profits and a royalty to the holding company for the use of the trademark. That's unreasonable, right? It has to be reasonable. It can't be 100% of your profits get sent to this other company because you're using a trademark. No, that's not the way that's going to work. So it has to be a reasonable trademark agreement, right? 15%, 20%, something that's reasonable. So now what do you got? What do you do with the other 80? Right? You need strategic planning to deal with the other 80. There's not some, fix all that you can just throw on and all of a sudden your taxes disappear. If that was true, Elon Musk and all of them guys would be using it, right? There is no one thing that you can just do, open up just one trust, and then you put the one thing over in the one trust and the trademark and the royalty, and boom, you're tax free. It doesn't work that way, right? So everything has to be reasonable. It has to be like within industry standards. What are people paying in royalties and legitimate royalties on IP? If 15% is the industry standard, then that better be, in line with what you're doing. And then you have to have other things going on, right? Is there a management fee, right? And if there's a management fee, is there a management company? Because your holding company shouldn't be doing anything. It should only hold shares in other companies, right? That's all a holding company does. So if your holding company is working, that means your holding company has an opening to be sued. All right. If your holding company is performing any services, that's an opening to be sued. You don't want your holding company sued. So your holding company shouldn't be doing any work. So if there's a management company that's managing the operating company, that's another company, right? And that might be more corporate tax rates, that might be more annual reports. So you have to balance all of the stuff, right? How much am I going to be paying in annual reports? Is there an annual tax that I have to pay whether I make money or not? There's a lot of U.S. states that have that, right? So if you have, a Maryland LLC, you might have to pay $300 a year whether you make money or not. If you have a Californian LLC, it's worse. I think it's $500 a year whether you make money or not, just because you have the LLC, right? So if you got 20 houses and 20 LLCs for the 20 houses at 500 a pop, right? And then what happens when COVID hits? A lot of people got jammed up with that. COVID hits, people aren't paying their rent. You can't evict them. They're stuck in your houses, and each LLC that you got that house in, now you have to pay your annual, report for, right? So what's 20 times 500? And ain't nobody paying their rent, right? So those are the things that have to be weighed as far as, what strategy you're going to go ahead and implement. Is how much is that strategy going to cost, and not from the strategy professional, how much is it going to cost with regulatory bodies. So it's really important to kind of have that together. There was somebody who wanted us to sell their company that also had a piece of property in it here in Kenya. So they were selling their company, but if you buy the company, you would get the piece of property. But these people have not managed the property because they're not here. So I'm not talking about physical management. I'm talking about they haven't done their tax filings, which is ridiculous because it's a zero tax filing. So it's what's called a nil tax filing. So all you got to do is file it. You don't have to pay nothing. You know what I mean? You just file it for free. Well, now they have penalties, right? So because you didn't file it, or you didn't pay the CPA to file it, or whatever the case may be, now there's penalties stacked up. So now if we were to sell that company, we have to clear all those penalties first, right? we would have to clear, all the KRA penalties. We'd have to clear all of that stuff and bring that company back into compliance in order to sell it, which kind of sucks for them because that's the easiest way to get a property. It's like if that property is already in a company and all you got to do is buy the company, that transaction could take 3-4 days. Whereas if you have to move a piece of property from one person's name to another person's name, that's a 30-day transaction, minimum. Might end up being 2 months. So super easy to handle that kind of transaction if they had a professional team, if they had been taking care of everything they have to take care of, filing, tax returns for zero is probably the easiest thing in the world. But some people just neglect stuff that's not in their face. So, they were in Japan and they came through an agent. Again, part of why we're not doing the agent thing anymore, right? So, their agent told them to do it, I'm sure, but there was not a whole lot of financial incentive for the agent to keep pushing it. And so they just never did it. And so I think they might be 2-3 tax returns behind, right? They were supposed to build their thing and all of that, and then they never did. Now they just want to sell it, but now they're like upside down, and they won't be able to get tax clearance without paying more money to cover the fines. And the fines like 20,000 Kenyan shillings. So you're talking about each fine is like, let's just say $200. So each fine is like $200. You got 3 years of it, so you already got $600 in fines. But then you're gonna have to come back and bring the company into compliance. So you have to do the 3 years of tax filings. Then you have to do the 3 years of annual reports, right? So the BRS has a separate kind of tax filing that has to be done. So none of that stuff is done. So yeah, they're gonna have a really serious issue selling because none of their stuff is done. So professionals, they pinch the penny and cost themselves $1 now. My dad used to say they cut off their nose to spite their face. So now they got an issue. So just make sure that you got your professionals in place and that they know what they're doing. Don't put yourself in a bad situation. What if we already engaged an agent to work with you? There are only 3 agents. All of them have been informed that we're not doing agents anymore, only referrals. So just go back to them. They'll still get paid a referral fee if you on board and you build a house with us or whatever. They'll still get paid the fee that they normally get paid, but you're not their client, right? You would be our client. The last agent client was actually, I was talking to that lady, Tiffany, that was on here. And I was like, hey, Tiffany, that was the last agent client. We're not doing any more agent clients. So Tiffany's technically not our client. She's one of the agent's clients. You've recently come on with an agent. There's only 3. There's one in Florida, there's one in Ireland, and there's one in Mexico. So if you're not dealing with somebody based in one of those 3 places, then you might, be dealing with a scammer or something. But if you dealt with any of them, and you obviously haven't been referred to me yet, so if you dealt with any of them and you're supposed to be referred to me, you can just go back to them, and that's what they'll do. They'll do a referral now, and they'll do a referral email and clarify their position, and then they're out. We're not there'll be no meetings with them. They won't be managing anything. They won't be bringing in any other people that don't need to be there. And then we'll proceed. Make sure that you're taken care of. If there's something funky with that, just this is a business account, so just go to the account profile and send us an email. And then if you need to send us a copy of whatever correspondence you've been engaged in, you can do that as well. Okay. Yes, that Francesca is the one in Mexico. Yes. So yeah. Francesca knows. She's actually relieved because it's a lot of work to manage as an agent, to manage everything, and she's not on the ground. So how does that work? You know what I mean? She's not here. So she's actually quite relieved that we've put an end to that. And so yeah, she'll absolutely, because she's gonna get paid the same and not do the same level of work. So she'll push you right through. I'm sure she's gonna put you on her calendar. And then she'll refer you over and you'll work directly with us. but can't wait to work with you. Yeah, Francesca always takes December off. Actually, Candace, who's our agent in Florida, she does the same thing. She takes December off as well. So she might be waiting for January. And it does slow down here. Like the government shuts down a bit in December as well. The one thing I will tell you though is that if immigration is part of what you're coming to us for, they do start a queue. So it does make sense to get your immigration going, even though everything's going to shut down and you're not going to see much movement over the entire, course of the rest of this month and all of next month. When they open up in the middle of January, when they open up, they will start like first come first serve. So it does make sense to get in the queue. So if that's part of what you're doing with her, just let her know that and see if she'll go ahead and throw your referral over to us, and then we can get you in line. It's not that kind of government shutdown. Like it's not like the nonsense in the United States. What it is the highest level government officials, they have their time off, and so this is the time that they take with their family, and they typically take it abroad, because obviously they're paid quite well as that level of government official. So they're flying, all over the world, just spending the holidays with their family. And there are certain things that we actually need their signatures on the immigration side, even on land transfers and stuff like that. You need the actual land registrar's signature on the transfer and all of that stuff. So when those guys are all out on vacation for the holidays, all of that level of governmental service kind of grinds to a halt. The things that like are automatic, like creating a company. Once you meet all the criteria, the system generates the company certificate almost automatically, right? It's electronic. So like that still works because there's not an actual physical signature that's needed. But all of the highest level government officials that require an actual physical signature, that stuff all kind of grinds to a halt while the holidays are in effect. But they do like create a queue. So if you get in line while while it's essentially ground to a halt, when they start back up, they start from the first one in line. So typically up until like the middle of February, everything is kind of delayed. What does construction have to do with? I think that's supposed to say offshore. Oh, it could have everything to do with it, right? So you can create a trust estate. A lot of our clients do that, where they have a trust estate, right? And so what ends up happening is the entire estate is created, and then the estate is owned by typically a company that's under the trust, right? And then their trust plan stretches forward from there. Because remember, the passport portfolio is typically part of their family trust plan as well, and a lot of those passport anchorings are anchored inside of the ability to have some kind of residency there, right? So typically, when you create a trust estate, number one, that estate is probably tax exempt, right? So that helps. Number two, there's a place for like all of the family reunions to happen, and more importantly than that, the family meetings, right? Because your family should really convert to a company at some point, right? So like my household has a budget. My household has its own tax ID number. There are people that work for my house. Like our governance doesn't work for us. Our governance works for our household, right? And we can look at profit and loss statements and see how the household is doing. We're not just guessing, or like, oh man, who left the AC on, or like, stuff that anyone who grew up in America, middle class or below, remembers. Like, oh, close the door, the AC's on, turn off the lights. Why are you leaving the lights on? Like all that type of stuff was reactionary to what your wallet felt like. There might not have, been any meat to it at all. right? But it was all reactionary to I went out and did this work, and then when I got paid, the paycheck was gone. So now I'm looking around the house. Hey, turn off the light, close the door, the AC's on, right? And so, but when you run it like a business and you actually have reports, you actually have profit and loss statements, you actually have quarterly, meetings with your spouse and possibly your department heads, right? And you're actually tracking everything. Then you don't respond that way within your house. You respond a little bit differently, right? And then you can set goals for what you want your house to produce, right? Most people, their houses don't produce nothing unless they're like a landlord in a multi building and they're living in one unit and they got three more units, then okay, right? But most people, they don't even think of their household that way, which they should. Their house should be working just as hard as they are. Their house should be producing just as hard as they are. But most people don't do that. So houses should pay for themselves if you have a proper household setup, right? And then that household grows, right? Like there's the Kennedy house, there's the house of Rockefeller. There are names that you've heard, and they all operate this way. No one talks about that part of it. They'll talk about the Kennedy Trust, they'll talk about the Rockefeller Trust, right? But they're not talking about how the household operates, and they're also not talking about how like DuPonts and stuff like that, these great families that lost their money, they also are not talking about how those are the ones that their household didn't operate though as a company and didn't have these settings in place, and their households didn't generate income, right? And so that's what should be happening, but it takes a mindset shift. It takes a mindset shift. We can do a whole live on that if we need to, but takes a mindset shift and a bit of discipline. The discipline comes slowly though, and that's okay. You just gotta get it going. All right. Any questions on any of that? Any questions on any of that? So we're good. I've been live for a little over an hour now. If there are no more questions, then I guess I'll go off live. If you're writing something or typing something, just hit enter, and then you can like rewrite it. Or if you're about to ask something, just put a 1 in the chat and I'll wait. If not, and everybody's had all their questions answered, then we should be good to go. Any other questions? And it looks like we're good. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me here in my early morning lives. I know in the United States it's like midnight, so thanks for hanging out with me. Late at night on the U.S. side, and I will see you guys tomorrow. We are going to a wedding this weekend, so I don't know if I will see you guys on Saturday. But if not, then I'll see you guys again on Sunday. So have fun, and you guys can email me any questions that pop up after the fact. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. We'll see you later.